Hey everybody, this is my 20-gallon tank here in my fish room. I've been working on getting some woodwork in this tank for a while now, and I finally acquired some that I'm happy with, and now we just got to get it in there, get it arranged, get some other rocks, some plants, and eventually we will start working on getting some fish in there. So this is my first real update on the wood since it's been in the tank, and it's been sitting in there for a few days. I've been waiting to see what would happen. I do have 2 pieces of wood in there at the moment. I'm not entirely sure which one I want to use, but I suspect it's going to be the one in the foreground there that looks sort of like the stump of a fallen tree with the roots and everything still attached to it. This piece of wood in the back is certainly interesting looking, but it is not really right for this tank, I don't think. So we'll have to see where else I can put that. This might go in my 125-gallon New World tank. I even considered putting it in my native tank, but I just put a huge piece of wood in my native tank that barely even fits in the tank, and so I don't think that having more wood in there is going to be ideal. At some point it would just be a tank full of wood with no fish or water in it, so that's not going to happen. So there you go. That's kind of just a first look at what the wood actually looks like sitting in the tank. My concern was whether or not I was going to bring home any little critters, and I did, and I'm actually happy about it. The first thing I brought home was snails. Shortly after putting the wood in the tank, I noticed some snails on the glass. I noticed some snail eggs starting to develop on the glass. You can see a little spot of snail eggs right there. That little white smudgy mark on the glass is snail eggs. There's another little smudgy mark right there with some snail eggs. So I will have lots and lots of snails in this tank. If you actually start looking around, you can see these little white marks on the glass all over the place are snail eggs. So I will have a lot of snails in this tank here pretty soon. But the thing I'm most excited about was when I first noticed this morning, I turned the lights on, I saw this little movement around the surface. And so what I've got now is these little, some people call them water skimmers, some people call them water striders, some people call them water spiders. I've always called them water striders, and these look like newly hatched versions of them. They're tiny, tiny little white things jumping around on the surface of the water, and at first when I looked at them, I thought they were springbacks or springtails, whatever they're called. I can never remember what they're called, but the little tiny things that you get in your aquarium that jump across the surface of the water. I have them in a lot of my tanks, and I just assumed that that's what these were. But when you look at them up close, you can clearly see it's got that little water strider sort of pointy, elongated body with 4 legs that stick out in, all 4 corners, and that's a water strider. So the fish don't eat them. I'm not really sure why the fish don't eat them. I don't know if they're poisonous to fish or what, but I have watched them for years out in nature and always wondered how they survived on the surface like that without the fish just coming up and making snacks out of them immediately. But they never do. The fish always leave those things alone. So I've always been kind of curious to have some in my tank and see what they do and just see how they look. And now I've actually got some, and I can only assume that they came home in the form of eggs on that piece of wood. So that is something I've talked about in the past, that is a possibility. You could bring home who knows what, that, insect larva or whatever that's attached to a rock or attached to a piece of wood you bring home, and if you don't sterilize it and put it in your tank, it's going to hatch out in your tank. I'm not concerned about that. I'm never really worried about anything hatching out of my tank that's going to be really problematic. Hydra would probably be the thing I would be most worried about bringing home, and I don't really have a tank where Hydra would even really be an issue. That only really is a problem if you have really, really small stuff, like you're breeding shrimp or you're trying to grow brine shrimp for a food source. If you're breeding fish and you have fry, Hydra can be problematic, but for full-grown fish, Hydra really aren't even that big of an issue. In fact, a lot of fish will even eat the Hydra. So that's the only thing I ever really get concerned about bringing home, other than, things like ick or maybe some sort of internal parasite. I've never really had any problem with that. I feel like I'm as likely to bring that home from the fish store as I am to bring it home from the, the stream or the river or something. But the water striders are a new one for me. I've never had water striders in any of my tanks before, although you'd almost probably think I should have by now, but I have not. But now we do, so I'm excited about that. And there is a little squiggly thing swimming around in the back, right up against the line of bubbles there. That does not look like a detritus worm. It almost looks like some sort of tadpole looking thing. So I might have brought home more than I thought. That, well, I don't even know what that is. It's definitely not a mosquito larvae. And it definitely has a fat head on it, almost like a tadpole would, with a more slender body behind it. So I am not sure what that is. And there's a good look at one of those water striders. You can clearly see now, with it zoomed in a little bit, that that is not one of those springbacks. That is definitely one of those little water striders. There's another one right there. So I'm kind of excited about that, but I'm a little curious as to what that little squiggly thing is going to turn out to be. So as of yet, I'm not really going to be adding any fish to this tank. We're going to let it sit and we're going to let it develop. We're going to see what happens with the little squiggly things and the bugs and everything, and we're going to make sure that we don't really have any issues in this tank prior to putting fish in it. If I have some kind of weird explosion of fungus growth all over everything, or who knows. You know, I literally just grabbed some pieces of wood out of the reservoir, brought them home and stuck them in my tank. I didn't even rinse them off. I literally did not even rinse these off in my garden hose out back. I brought them home, pulled them out of my truck, and stuck them in the fish tank. And so now we're starting to see what happens when you do that. We start to see some little bugs and squiggly things in the tank. I'm really curious as to what that little squiggly thing is going to turn out to be. So make sure you're subscribed and you won't miss that or anything else I've got coming up. You never know what it's going to be with me. So thanks for watching this one, and I will see you real soon on the next one.